Hello, my name is David Brett. I'm the editor of the New Westminster Times, coming to you from Tipperary Park, across the street from Queen's Avenue in New Westminster. And joining me today is New Westminster Times contributor and journalist extraordinaire, Amy Hamm. How are you doing, Amy?
Hi, Dave. I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's always lovely being in the beautiful parks in New West, especially when you can see our wonderful heritage homes.
So we're going to have a conversation about what's happening here in New Westminster that is really relevant to the entire province of British Columbia and is a very serious issue that engages a lot of different hot button issues across the province. And one of them is housing. So, what we're going to talk about today, and uh, both Amy and I live in New Westminster, and we kind of have a New Westminster state of mind, and we bring that to the New Westminster Times because a lot of what happens here in New Westminster is really just a microcosm of what's happening across the province. And so, let's get right into it here. What is happening? I'll just set it up a bit and then ask Amy for her perspective. So, as many people across the province know, the EB government put in place a few years ago a few bills which are designed to increase housing supply. And one of the elements of that is what was called transit oriented development. And any areas of municipalities or that are close to SkyTrain in particular were slated for dramatic densification.
The program enables more housing within an 800-meter radius of the city's 5 SkyTrain stations. High-density forms of housing, such as apartments and condos, will be permitted near the station.
Where we're standing here today in Tipperary Park is not that far from the Columbia Street SkyTrain station. So what has happened, which a lot of people don't realize, is that those concentric circles have taken in this incredible heritage neighborhood of Queen's Park. So about 200 properties within the Queen's Park neighborhood, with some of the most significant heritage houses in the province, are now slated, according to the New Westminster official community plan, for up to 8-story structures. 8 stories, including the entirety of Queen's Avenue in New Westminster. So, as someone who has lived in New West and sort of taken in the heritage, how does that make you feel that these heritage homes could just go the way of the buffalo in the name of housing supply?
I mean, when you think of New Westminster, we were the royal city until our city council decided that we are no longer the royal city because they didn't want the association with our colonial history, wherein we were named the royal city after Queen Victoria named us New Westminster. And I think the same thing is happening here. What makes New Westminster known, what people love this city for, and what anytime I tell someone I live in New Westminster, 9 times out of 10 I hear, "Oh, are you in Queen's Park?" Or, "Do you know Queen's Park? Do you know that area? It's so beautiful." This is what New Westminster is to so many people, is the heritage. We were the first capital city of the province. This is truly what we are, and I think it would be a horrible tragedy to just start plowing down our history for high rises that frankly aren't needed.
Exactly. And I don't think I'm wrong on this, but I don't think most people in British Columbia realize that this has even happened. That these transit oriented development areas have taken in great, huge swaths of the most significant character neighborhoods in the province. And so, so there's two issues happening here. This concept of housing supply, and it's just completely disregarded this what is known as a heritage conservation area. And a little bit of a background is that The entirety of the Queen's Park neighborhood, around over 700 homes, was designated as a heritage conservation area in 2017. Now, you would think that the folks in Victoria, when they're putting in this transit oriented development plan, would kind of, why not just carve out these heritage areas?
I think that there are, a couple of issues going on, and one is this argument that we need the density, which I think can be proven false for numerous reasons, including that we have already an oversupply of condos across the Lower Mainland. For instance, CMHC has released data saying that we have 2,500 brand new, unsold, empty condos. And that's probably an underestimate. And I can say, I'm someone who lives in the Queensborough neighborhood of New Westminster. We have brand new, unsold condos in that neighborhood, and the developers are advertising these really beautiful condos at a 30% discount. Those aren't even sold. So the notion that we should tear down beautiful houses like this and put up 8-story condos, that's crazy. But the other aspect of this story is that it's sort of a cultural war against colonialism. It's something that our city council and the Community First Party has been doing for years. They did it, as I mentioned, when they took away our Royal City moniker. They determined that they didn't, I think previous mayor Jonathan Cote said he didn't want to send letterhead to Indigenous groups that had the Royal City moniker or a colonial logo on it. So we now have a logo that is a tugboat and some waves. We see this repeatedly. One of my recent reports for the New West Times was about a parks and recreation strategy for the next decade, and littered throughout this hundreds and hundreds of pages, nonstop talk about colonialism and how the ongoing harms of colonialism without defining what these harms are. So when I see that no effort is being made to conserve our history, including with these beautiful houses that quite literally are what draw people, I think, to our city and make our reputation and make a lot of people want to live here.
Now, one of the kind of thorny aspects to this problem is that you have the city halls now being at war with Victoria. The folks in City Hall are saying, well, we have no choice. It's been mandated top down. This whole thing has been rammed down the throats of all the municipalities that thou must and shall densify in exactly these areas. Doesn't matter what your plans are.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of mentality in the provincial government would kind of have this prescriptive approach and just sort of ignore the culture of the cities that they're affecting?
Last December, there was a group of 15 mayors that sort of revolted against David Eby's policies. They said that, you can't just come in and run roughshod over our communities and decide to do this, and the residents are extremely unhappy. That included Burnaby Mayor, Port Coquitlam Mayor, not New Westminster, of course. But Eby is cut from the same cloth, I think, as a lot of the New Westminster politicians, and he's also a very anti-colonialist guy. So I think for him, the notion that this deserves to be preserved, that's not a concern for him. Instead, what he said to media at the time when this backlash came out was, well, I have these density targets, and nobody was willing to do it individually in a municipality, and it has to happen. So I was forced to force you to do it, which I think is an excuse for his underlying beliefs about not needing to preserve our heritage. This heritage conservation area that Dave was a huge part of enacting in our city is the largest heritage conservation area in Western Canada. So like you said, I don't think a lot of people understand what's at risk in New Westminster and what we stand to lose. Like, this is an enormous part, not just for our city, but even for the province, for our history. It would be tragic if we just started chopping all these houses down.
Yes, true, and it is affecting other cities too. I know when this legislation was first introduced, I reached out to folks who were part of a heritage conservation area in Kelowna, and they were just blown away because they don't have SkyTrain there. So there's special density related to SkyTrain, but there's also these, I think they call it frequently used or high volume bus corridors as well, so transit corridors. So if you have buses that come more than once every 10 minutes or 15, I can't remember the specific details, but all across BC, even if it's just rapidly coming bus services, the densification impacts are across BC. They're not just in Westminster or Vancouver.
Kelowna's official community plan goes to public hearing tonight. Not everyone will be there to applaud. The Kelowna South Central Association of Neighbourhoods has a problem with it. They find that it will put heritage conservation areas like this one at risk. What does the plan do to your heritage conservation areas?
It opens it up for development for apartment buildings, row houses, commercial, through the Heritage Conservation Area because of a little color on a map, map 3.1, has it designated as core area neighborhood. It's a brand new designation, and they've lumped the Heritage Conservation areas into core area neighborhood.
So now, just another question. One of the kind of thorny issues that comes up in this argument, and we hear it a lot on social media, is that this generational argument is that, well, you know, the quote unquote boomers are protecting heritage to protect their own vested interests, and they don't care about millennials or anyone who's trying to get into the housing market. Why can't we just have a bunch of townhouses here in multifamily? And they'll say, are you against people having housing? What do you think about that argument, this kind of generational argument?
Well, I'm a millennial and I don't want these houses torn down. I'm fortunate that I'm also a property owner, but I know a lot of persons in my generation, that's unattainable for them in most areas of Canada right now. And I think even if this area were to be redeveloped into townhomes or 8-story condos, that still excludes all of these people from the market. The reality for Canada right now is that our housing market is it's out of reach for just about anyone. So I don't really necessarily buy into this sort of classist or ageist argument about who wants to maintain heritage areas and who doesn't. I don't think it holds water.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know when I was at City Council on Monday, and City Council's just down the hall here, we're at the corner of 4th Street and Queens Avenue. So all these iconic houses are now zoned 8 stories. So what will this mean? Well, one of the councillors here sort of let it slip that she did a master's thesis on zoning and class. That the zoning bylaws and the housing in the neighborhoods were all developed about race and class. And it seems like there's this war on heritage almost that wasn't here 10 years ago. So what has happened in the last 10 years that has brought about this kind of these culture wars when it comes to race and class as it comes to zoning?
I think it's just a general movement of woke culture in Canada as a whole. And while we are seeing some shifts in certain areas, New Westminster has a majority council that's sort of this NDP Labour-backed council. It's almost entirely community first. I think that's going to change significantly in the October civic elections, because you can see when you go online, you look at what the community is saying, and they feel extremely unheard by the persons in power right now. And of course, when the Heritage Conservation Area Act or legislation here passed, it was unanimous. There was enormous support for that. So right now, I think changing the official community plan as the city has, I don't think they will actually have the support behind them, whether or not they're using sort of woke cultural justifications or not. I think voter numbers will still have the upper hand, and we'll actually see what happens in an election.
Right. That's a good point, and uh, it's somewhat hard sometimes to discern sort of the louder voices on social media, who will kind of rail against, and they will specifically say white rich people versus everyone else. And from what I've been able to discern when it comes to this heritage neighborhood is that it's supported across the board by everyone. There is no kind of race and class and power structure. This idea of that these homes over here are sort of put forward as symbols of oppression.
Yeah.
So it's even the architecture itself is kind of slagged as it's a symbol of power imbalance. And are we ever going to get past that?
I hope so. And it's interesting if you look at the history of our city, and if people really want to talk about colonialism or displacement, there was no settlement in the Queen's Park area. Nobody was ever displaced for any of these houses that were built. There certainly on the riverfront and on the water that happened, but not up here. And again, I think just suggesting that people who want to preserve something that's a part of our cultural history and that is this beautiful is like something that only people who are white or wealthy or whatever would want to do is in and of itself rather racist, because everybody has the capacity, I think, to appreciate this beauty and to respect our culture. And at the same time you can say here's what we got wrong and we'll make amends for that, but that doesn't mean that we have to destroy our heritage, literally, which is sitting right here, and look how beautiful it is.
Yeah, that's a good point. So just sort of to reiterate, what's happening here in the Queen's Park neighborhood is that huge swaths of this neighborhood are now zoned for up to 8 stories. They call it mid-rise. So if you could envisage what that might look like to this incredibly iconic street of Queens Avenue. The entirety of Queens Avenue is slated for 8 stories, and houses going back to the late 1800s. So hopefully that doesn't happen. I mean, ultimately, we're talking about trying to solve the housing crisis, and we're in a state now where there's a glut of housing on the market, and there's unlikely to be a huge demand for new apartments here. But I think it's really important that people be aware that this is happening. And so the municipal, you mentioned the municipal race that's coming up. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on how this kind of, this pushback against the decolonial narrative and the anti-heritage messaging and this kind of classist messaging is going to create a backlash, do you think?
I hope it creates more of a backlash than it does. I think there is a lot of caution, even with the New S Progressives, which are sort of the quote-unquote right-wing or more centrist party. It seems like they don't go there so much. In certainly not in the same way that the Community First or the left-wing party likes to toss out these insults about colonialism and racism. I wish that it would become more of an open sort of cultural war, because the only way you can defeat sort of these really bad ideas is by not being afraid to engage. And if somebody hurls out this insult about, well, you're being colonialist, you're being racist, you're being white supremacist, just you have to shut it down and say, no, that's ridiculous, and not sort of give any credence to the politicians who are attempting to do that.
Okay, well, thanks, Amy, for joining us. So for folks across New Westminster and across the province, check to see what your zoning is all about right now, because it's changed. And cities across the province have had to update their official community plans. There's been all kinds of bureaucratic process that has had to come behind this, what I call the EB upzone, that could spell disaster for a lot of cities across the region. And but this is just one of the issues, the potential demolition of our cherished heritage. So thanks for joining me today, Amy, and to talk about this topic. We'll follow up on it in the future. And so finally, if you appreciate our journalism at the New Westminster Times, Amy has been a contributor since we started this newspaper in 2022, and it's been a great ride. But it costs money to do what we do. It's not free to do independent journalism. So if you appreciate our journalism, go to newwesttimes.com, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and there's a button up in the right-hand corner that says support our work. If you would feel so inclined, we would really appreciate it. But for now, thanks for watching.